Hello and welcome to Real Reflection, Cinema's Societal Mirror. We are your hosts. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be talking about two films that we are classifying as misunderstood satire. And those films are American Psycho and Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes, they both have a similar vibe in terms they both concern Wall Street type people, obviously men of, as the title of the latter film suggests, both men of business and their roles in society and how, society as it exists right now, a very capitalism driven world, kind of encourages very sociopathic behavior and very amoral behavior. Both films kind of try to tackle it in different ways. I think American Psycho is a very interesting case study on it. That came out in 2000. Around the same time, it just occurred to me, there was a movie, Boiler Room, came out around that same time, which was also about I think about the Wolf of Wall Street type dudes, about guys who were selling these, crappy stocks and everything and swindling people. But American Psycho started, for those who might not know, started as a novel by one Bret Easton Ellis. I believe it was released in 1990 or 91, if I'm not mistaken. And the novel was very controversial at the time. It actually got a lot of protest from particularly feminist groups because of the very graphic depictions of violence in the story against women. The main character, Patrick Bateman, is just a completely psychotic monster, but he presents a very polished veneer, and he works at a Wall Street firm in mergers and acquisitions. He does everything to look like a normal guy and fit in, to the point where he is constantly mistaken for other people. And in the film, he's portrayed magnificently by Patrick Bateman. And one of my favorite running gags in the film is that because so many people who talk to him don't realize he's Patrick Bateman, they keep thinking he's Marcus Halberstrom or Paul Allen or something. They keep telling him to his face how much they hate him, how much they hate Patrick Bateman.
What a dweeb Patrick Bateman is.
What a slime. What a nothing of a person. And they're saying it to Christian Bale's smiling face. This film is interesting to me because it is a film that seems to, nowadays, an online discourse specifically, seems to have a weird cult following in terms of people who kind of worship the character of Patrick Bateman as a quote-unquote Sigma male. I'd be lying if I fully understood what the concept of a Sigma male is.
Yeah, we're just throwing Greek letters and stuff at this point.
Yeah, I think it's just the Gen Z / alpha version of what an alpha male was.
Oh,
I don't know. In other words, they see shots of him in certain scenes, especially in some of the sex scenes in the movie where he's doing these crazy poses. And I think that out of context, that stuff kind of looks cool. But I'm just convinced
that's daddy.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay.
There's no way those people have watched the movie, though, because if you watch the movie, they do a very good job of making him kind of look pathetic.
That's interesting, right? So, Patrick Bateman, not as villain, but as some kind of, anti-hero, right? Where there is something, I don't know, I guess appealing to people. I think both these films do fit in a tradition of, movies that take a look at Wall Street and the financial industry, right? Wall Street, right? From what, the 80s?
I would say 80s on, yeah. That was because I feel I'm not a historian on the subject, but I do feel the 1980s on was when Wall Street became a fixture, an institution in the public consciousness. Because I feel before that, our economy was still largely manufacturing based. It really wasn't until the 80s when manufacturing left large chunks of America that we suddenly realized, our economy is actually more based on trading stocks and sell. We don't produce things anymore. We just buy and sell.
And according to Wolf of Wall Street, the whole stock market game is fugazi, right?
Yeah, pixie dust, fairy dust, as Matt McConaughey says.
It doesn't exist. You're moving money around. And nobody's getting richer until they cash out and get the actual money. So until then, you just keep moving it. So I agree that probably sometimes around the last quarter of the century, American culture started paying attention, right, to what Wall Street has become, right, and it starts getting expressed with films being made. I'm sure we could go back and find more, but
absolutely.
in Wall Street, right, there is still a moral running through that, right, where the bad get punished, right? Michael Douglas's character. By the
Yes.
time we're entering the new millennium with American Psycho the film, right, or late 80s, early 90s with Bret Easton Ellis's book, right?
Yes.
That moral is removed, right? The bad don't get punished in American
No.
Psycho, you might argue. Because I do want to talk about the ending. But
Absolutely.
then Wolf of Wall Street, there is that moral punishment consequence, right? But
Yeah.
it's a joke, honestly, right? So
Yeah,
there's-
he's pathetic by the end, but
Yeah.
he still like he's not facing nearly the level of punishment he should for what he did to him.
yeah, there is
Yeah.
consequence, but almost gets away as much as Patrick Bateman does.
Yeah.
So there, like, that is a message that's coming from this, like in terms of our culture, society. And then we can talk about how people might misinterpret or interpret. But yeah, okay. So where do you want to go? Let's talk about American Psycho a little bit.
I think what I want to talk about with American Psycho is I feel like it's a very strong satire, both in its novel and film form. I will say to those who want to read the novel, I just say you're in for a longer haul. It's a bit of a lengthy book, and again, the descriptions of the violence especially are a lot more brutal. So just know that going in, and it's just also it just runs a little longer. The movie basically condenses the book down to its essential elements, but also in a very artful way.
Yeah, it's a tough read.
Yeah,
and the older I get, the harder it becomes to read again.
Absolutely, because
When I
I'm
was
trying
young,
to reread
I was
it now.
unfazed.
Oh yeah, I was a high school kid. I was
Yeah.
already into true crime and everything. So reading a fictionalized thing that was kind of inspired by that and filtered through irony and everything, I was having a gas, except for one sequence, and maybe I'll talk.
Is it with the rat?
The rat thing, like, and also in the movie, the way he kills the prostitute, the sex worker, I should say. I'm sorry. In the film, it's through that very artful sequence with the chainsaw
Yeah.
dropping it down. In the book, her death is so drawn out.
Yeah,
and it's the most. I won't describe it in this. You're just gonna have to read the book. I'm sorry, I can't bring myself to say
yeah.
it. It involves a car battery. I'll say that much. Anyway, but what director and co-writer Mary Harron, and she's a great filmmaker. Unfortunately, a lot of her stuff is hard to find nowadays. Her film I Shot Andy Warhol, amazing film. But she took the book on, and then her and screenwriter Guinevere Turner, who cameos in the film as Patrick's friend, who unfortunately meets a very grisly end. They really do their best to kind of filter the story through their lens as lesbian women who definitely had to deal with all sorts of crappy Wall Street guys like that, just being around them, being around that toxic energy. And Bret Easton Ellis has been very upfront about the fact that this book is a satire of what he saw as the stifling conformity of being around 80s New York yuppies. Because he grew up in very rich Los Angeles roots. That's what Less Than Zero is about. And then I guess as his literary career kind of took off, he found himself hanging around in New York City and just basically hanging out with guys like Patrick Bateman in these clubs. So that's why the film works so well, is because it's drawn from so much of his lived experience. And he was alienated by the fact that he couldn't identify with all these guys who looked the same, talked the same, all went to the same clubs, had all these weird ways of establishing status. So the way he satirizes that is that the main character is an unrepentant, psychopath who kills people in very sloppy ways, oftentimes in broad daylight or in public situations where he could easily get caught if somebody just were to happen to turn and look at the right moment. But he gets away with it because, again, same haircut as every yuppie on Wall Street. He's a bland white dude, and he knows that he's a bland white dude, and he uses it to that effect. And so he's able to get away with things.
Yeah, there is this lack of individuality amongst these Wall Street types in the film and novel, right? Where it's like, yeah, we're taking a look at Patrick Bateman and all of the horrible stuff he's doing, but just like the idea is suggested that they're all like this, right? Maybe not murder, because murder's the art. That's the metaphor and the exaggeration, right?
Yes.
What we're saying, right? What Ellis is saying is Wall Street guys are terrible human beings who don't care about others and are literally getting away with horrible crimes, right? Like
100%.
we're going to hyperbolize, right, what those crimes are with
Yes.
these gruesome murders to show you the depravity, but, like this society at the end of the movie more than the book, right? Like is suggesting that they're just okay with covering up anything that may or may not have happened. Right. That we allow this behavior. And by allowing, condoning, right? Like we're all complicit in it, right? The corruption we're allowing, and it's there in both films, right? Because we have the hyperbole removed from Wolf of Wall Street, right? It is more realistic, right? Less exaggerated. And I think what real life Jordan said was like it's actually understated, like some of the stuff in Wolf of Wall Street, So, there's definitely that criticism, right? Where it's like we glorify and worship the dollar, and these Wall Street guys are the anointed priests, and we allow them to abuse others, and get away with basically murder, right? Because they got money, and we want that money too, right? Or something on that level, you know?
Yeah, it's like there's kind of a wish fulfillment thing to an extent, and I think that's where it gets... The lines get blurred in terms of the efficacy of the satire, because a lot of times people say, well, you might be trying to say this thing, but to a lot of people, it just looks like you're glorifying it. And I don't really agree with that, but I can't necessarily dismiss it completely out of hand, because you can't help but notice how pop culture does. And it's something that's even more intensified now due to the internet and meme culture and everything. But pop culture does have a tendency to boil any kind of artistic work or statement down to just a memorable thing. Like, here, I'm just going to give you a brief example that's completely out of our purview. But a couple years back,
Here we go, left field.
A couple years back, I finally watched Saturday Night Fever, right?
Okay.
The John Travolta movie. And for years, because of pop culture, all I thought about is that it's the movie where John Travolta does a lot of disco dancing, right? But that movie is actually 95% him having an existential crisis, because he's this Guido and he knows all he's really good at is dancing. He doesn't know what to do with himself. And then there's a couple scenes where he dances. Right. I'm like, why did they leave out the fact that this is actually a compelling character study with some cool dance sequences? I would have watched this movie years ago. It's a similar thing in the sense that Wolf of Wall Street, as much as it's a great statement about the evils of Wall Street, it gets reduced to Matthew McConaughey thumping his chest, which, by the way, was apparently a little ritual he did in real life to get himself hyped up before scenes, and he just incorporated that into because I read his Green Lights book. But and so with Wolf of Wall Street, I feel like the thing that gets misunderstood is that, and it's kind of a similar thing with Goodfellas, in that Scorsese gives you so much of the movie kind of like riding the high of the character as they seduce you and give you the inside track into their world.
Well, yeah, I think that goes for both of these, right? That unreliable narrator is persuasive. It's Holden Caulfield and Catcher in the Rye. Like you end up agreeing with the guy even though they're really wrong and their views are twisted. Yes.
And though both films give you hints along the way, I think American Psycho even more overtly so. That
Feed me cat.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah. Let's actually. I'm sorry. I know we're all over the place, but let's get into that.
We can do a minute and a half more on American Psycho.
Okay, let's get into that real quick. I think the way American Psycho is misunderstood, because it's such an effective character study, and because the film and book both do such a good job of blurring reality due to Patrick's worsening mental state over the course of the story, it causes a lot of people, my wife included, we got into almost an argument about it when when I rewatched this movie, because she was watching with me. She was convinced that all the murders happen in Patrick Bateman's head and none of it's real.
Right.
And especially because of how outlandish things get towards the end. But I say no. I don't like, and Ellis agrees with me on this, so I think I'm backed up pretty well here. But I think the story loses its potency if Patrick didn't kill any people, because the whole point is that the culture of Wall Street and all of this and his white privilege protects him from consequences. If he's not killing anybody, then that's not really an effective statement on anything.
Think about the closing monologue, right, that he gives with Reagan on the TV and like what matters and what doesn't, right? Because if you interpret this as it's in his head, then that's not what's on the surface, right? That's what's beneath the surface.
Yes.
And none of it matters because none of it's real. All that matters is what people see, right?
Okay.
And because
Yeah.
none of us are seeing that, that's not real, then there's nothing to worry about with Patrick Bateman. He's done nothing wrong. He gets
Yeah.
away with it, and we almost excuse it that way, which I think is, like missing the forest for the trees with it, you know? Like going back to the meme thing, you can chop everything into these bites, right? Like these memes, but you're gonna miss the forest for the trees because it's not just that idea; it's how these ideas talk to each other and connect, and like the cause and effect and the poetry of it all, you know. All right, so let's switch gears into Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes.
Because yes, we could talk about just the ending of American Psycho or how it's different from the book.
We could do
for
an hour
probably forever.
on that scene.
So
I could easily do an hour on that scene.
I am less familiar with Wolf of Wall Street. I have watched it a couple of times. There's a part of me that, as a teacher, I hate to admit, I think I let a class convince me to let us watch it once.
Oh God!
And I was like, oh man, how did I keep my job that year? But like, whatever.
Wow.
So yeah, I can say those things. I can say that I think this film is very similar in terms of how it can appear to glorify the excess and like some of what comes with that from the Wall Street types. I can agree that I think some people see it as a celebratory thing more as a passing judgment on those people, which I think that those judgments are there in both of these films.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are you thinking about Wolf of Wall Street?
I mean, like I said, I think it's a film that tries to ride the line, much like American Psycho, tries to ride the line between a very effective character study, like a very, very good, just a study of what Jordan Belfort's mind was like, how he saw himself, what his rise to success looked like from the inside and the outside in a culture that glorified what he was doing. I also do think it's a judgment. I don't think Scorsese made that film to make you think that a man who nearly got his wife killed on a boat because they had to try to get to Italy in time to make some sort of deal with a bank, have some sort of business transaction happen on a certain time frame. I don't think you're supposed to think that's a guy you want to be or a good guy. The problem is, and maybe this is also a statement of just how bad the wealth divide has gotten in this country these days, where it's like, even if this guy's a piece of crap and you see him doing horrible things, he's still got a really nice house. And boy, isn't Margot Robbie really stunning as that wife of his?
Yeah.
Like, he's bad and what he's doing is bad and he's hurting people like us. Like, I think that's the thing. And maybe that's the part that people forget. And maybe that might be the one aspect critics might have in their corner, is that like the films, I mean, maybe in American Psycho, you do see it, like, because I always feel bad for the homeless man Patrick Bateman kills in that one sequence.
Sure.
But in Wolf of Wall Street, we don't see as much of like the lives ruined by the people whose money he was like playing around with and stuff like that. And I think it's so easy you get caught up in the fantasy, you forget like, oh, these guys, this guy I'm rooting for right now, he's do all this evil stuff he's doing with money. He's doing this with like my uncle's money. He's doing this with like my neighbor's money. He could be doing it with my money if he gave me a slick enough pitch. But I love him right now, even though it's like, you know.
But they address that as we enter the second act of the film, right?
You're right,
the first
they do.
wife goes to him and she's like, "So you're like doing this to like average Joes and this stuff with this penny stock stuff.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you feel better, like ethically, morally implied, right? If you were doing this with rich people who could afford it."
Yeah.
And that is what makes everything okay, right? I think in the eyes of the audience, where it's not us, it's not you and me, it's not,
You're right. They do kind of switch things up in
it's
that
the 1%. It's and he says it. We're going after the 1%. He uses that language.
Steve Madden.
Yeah,
that's their big whale. You're right. So I guess for maybe that is something that kind of makes it more okay for the audience, is that at a certain point they do start going after the big accounts. But I think I also think that now, because of what's happening to our economy, thanks to tech bros and the way like venture capital, which is they're like what Jordan Belfort was doing on steroids.
Right.
These guys, you're seeing. I mean, look, retail chains, all sorts of institutions get bought up by these venture capital places. They strip mine them, they load them up with debt, and then they sell them off, and then they end up shutting their doors. I mean, it just literally happened like last week. I think Red Lobster closed. There was a Red Lobster literally a couple blocks down from my house that like my wife and I go to a couple times. It's gone now because
that was like the last one standing.
Yeah, the VC company that owned them pushed this shrimp promotion because I think they had stakes in a company that sold shrimp. Like, it's that kind of thing. And these guys are buying and selling, and they're playing with seemingly big corporations and businesses, but I think it always trickles down to the little guy somehow. It's still, even though you're playing with a big man's money, that big man employs a lot of people who, when his ledgers start to get a little leaner, it's the little guy who's making a living working for him that gets, screwed over. And like you say, the film does address that, but I guess I like the film. I do think it's an effective story, an effective form of satire, but I think that's where people misinterpret it. They just see this, they see the drug use, they see the rampant sexual intercourse they were having apparently in the office, according to if the film's to be believed, and they just envy that, even though it's coming off the backs of people who don't deserve to get their livelihoods messed with. And it's just, I think Scorsese did such a good job that I do remember there was critical backlash when the film came out. I remember reading reviews where people said he was like irresponsible for making this movie, as though it's his fault that Wall Street guys like that exist.
I could also see some of the camp elements of this, like the Quaalude scene. I could see some like serious critics like hating some of the continuity errors in the drug use scenes, like missing the like, oh no, we're going for something here with some of these choices versus, oh, this is sloppy directing or editing. You know what I mean? This is a mistake. Why would he direct DiCaprio to do this here? I mean, I think both films on some level are like trying to condemn like money, capitalism, right? It is a drug. It is this corrupting thing that is a gateway to all this other stuff. And look what it does to people and how we worship it. And the irony is both these, Wolf of Wall Street more than American Psycho, actually, but both these films are major studio projects involving millions of dollars and thousands of people, and went on to make, millions of more dollars. So it's this thing that tries to look at itself.
There was an American Psycho musical.
Oh yeah,
which, by the way, I would unironically have gone to see if I had.
You?
I know. I have not seen it.
Okay. I was gonna say, if you saw this musical, you could tell me about it for the next 7.5 minutes. I would see it.
Oh man, no.
Because
it's like 10 years ago, so I was in college. I didn't have the money to go see a Broadway.
I think it was just West End. I don't think it came to America.
Oh, it didn't even come to America.
I think it did not get well received. It was like a Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark situation, which I saw. And I was not impressed. Like, honestly. And I was this is what happens when you work with clowns. You put on a circus. But like the show itself, I was like, okay, like, yeah, it had issues. That's another podcast entirely.
Yeah,
but okay, yeah, there is an American Psycho musical.
There was a sequel with Mila Kunis.
Oh,
I mean, I don't want to get in the weeds. Nobody wants to talk about that one.
Patrick Bateman only showed up, I think, once in the books since American Psycho. Did you read Glamorama?
I did read Glamorama, and
they talk about his coat of arms, and what's his face is Victor's really impressed with. Oh, Bateman's got a coat of arms. And like,
Zoolander is in my
Zoolander. Yeah, he like there was a whole legal thing that
he's still to this day. Bret Easton Ellis cannot talk about Zoolander because of the settlement.
They settled with him.
And the thing
honestly.
is, because if you read Glamorama, they 100% ripped it off.
Terrorist stuff. It's very similar.
But
somebody read it.
My hot take: Zoolander is better. Yeah, I have read Glamorama. That book is a slog.
It goes on for way too long.
I can't read a book where I'm 100%. I'm 100 pages ahead of the protagonist at any given moment, and that's exactly what you get with Victor. Whatever
it's hard
his
to
name
like
is.
Victor. Yeah. It's hard to really like him. Sort of by the end, there's growth and you care a little more, and I guess that's the point because he's not likable in Rules of Attraction either. Yeah. But
also Patrick Bateman being the brother of the main character of Rules of Attraction. It's such a weird thing.
And he shows up in Rules of Attraction and narrates a chapter, and it is he knew what he was going to do with American Psycho when he was writing. You know, like all of these characters and their lives existed in his head, and he's just showing us that world, with these books. So, yeah, that's cool. I'm
think-
reading The Shards right now. Have you read it?
I've been meaning to.
This just became the Brett Easton Ellis podcast. Brett, if you want to talk,
Yeah, man,
I'm sure
hey.
Chris and I would love to.
I think we could give
talk
you a
to
bump, dude.
Yeah.
Does
so
he still do? He
does
was doing a
podcasts
podcast
now.
for a while. Yeah.
He did. I listened to. He had Max Landis on come talk about like cancel culture and stuff. I listened to that.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a totally other thing.
Yeah. We can talk about that off.
But
mic.
yeah,
Jeez.
Brett, you wanna talk about some stuff? Give us a call. Did you read The Shards?
I know I need to. It's on my list of books I really want to read. I meant to go to like an author event he did in Brooklyn last year when the book came out, but
Yeah.
I missed that unfortunately.
Okay.
But, yeah, no, he's still a very interesting guy, and I from a friend of mine who did go and got a signed copy of the book, he told me The Shards was very good, so I need to read that. But Ellis is very good at kind of getting at just the very hollow heart of of just American wealth and consumerism, and also he might not even see this as much himself, but I think whiteness. I think he really gets to the heart of like just the hollowness of white supremacy and how stuff like Wall Street and how they in ways we don't think about trickle down. They contribute to the cultures of racism and misogyny that is rampant in our society, because these Wall Street guys, they're all about getting their money, and they use it to impress the right kind of women and everything everything is a status thing. It's about how their status is above the lower classes of people, above their status of how they can use women and everything. And I don't even know if Brett Easton Ellis would agree with me on this last point, because I think he's one of those people who finds, again, because of cancel culture and everything, is a little contentious about that kind of stuff.
Well, his whole career has been the cancel culture before we were calling it that stuff, so he's got a lot of experiences with it.
Yeah.
But
there's a lot of how like you can get away with stuff if you're white and male and wealthy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the triple threat, honestly. Yeah, and I think both of these films like do a good job holding up that mirror, right? With these protagonists, right? These
because they all engage in like casual like misogyny, racism, and everything, and they're never checked on it, because in their culture, that's just how you talk, that's just how you act. It's like somebody who's completely removed has to come up to them and tell them, yeah, like this is really wrong the way you're talking about people and treating these people who you see as beneath you.
No, and the film starts tossing little people,
Yeah, they're tossing little people. Like I said, Patrick Bateman just callously murders a homeless man. He targets women because they're especially like sex workers, because they're vulnerable. Like he fought like, and I feel like Brett Easton Ellis definitely did his research on real life serial killers, because a lot of Bateman's MOs are patterned after what a lot of serial killers, how they operated.
Yeah, you get hints and echoes of Bundy and Dahmer.
And Willem Dafoe was every Keystone Cop trying to catch them who couldn't do it.
Between that and Boondock Saints, like this is why I fell in love with Willem Dafoe. I've hit the mic again, and I'm getting a note, but we also have to wrap up.
You're right.
So thank you for listening to Chris and I just gush about these films and their critiques.
Controversial films.
Yeah. This is Real Reflections, Society's
Cinemas Societal Mirror. We trip up on this every time.
Carry us to the end.
Cinemas Societal Mirror. You're listening to it through LMC Media, which is a great platform that's letting us do this podcast. Really recommend you check out any other podcast LMC has, and check out other programming, because public media is where it's at. This is where your voice and any voice can really count, especially in a consolidated media landscape that we're living in this day and age. This is a great space, and they give us space to talk about stuff like this, talk about film. And yeah, keep listening to the show, keep supporting us, and we'll be back next month to talk movies again.
Thanks so much. Good night and good luck.
Good night and good luck indeed.